Welcome to Relativity Fest 2021. We're excited to talk today about how we use artificial intelligence in communication surveillance to find real risk within your organization and ignore the noise. My name is Peter Haller, and I lead product for Relativity Trace, our best-in-class communication surveillance product that's helping compliance teams around the world protect their business from internal misconduct.
And my name is Eileen Tian. I am a Trace specialist, and I lead Trace POCs and implementations of Trace for our clients.
You know, hey, Eileen, since you're on with customers, on the ground floor with customers, day in and day out, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that these teams are facing when attempting to monitor communications for risk?
All right, let's do that. Communication surveillance is hard these days because data is growing exponentially. Also, employees are using a myriad of communication channels, whether they be chat, voice, mobile, or email platforms. On top of that, people are becoming better at hiding bad behavior. Types of misconduct are constantly evolving. The majority of communications is comprised of unstructured data, and there's a lot of it. Usually multiple authors are involved. The content is comprised of shorthand or abbreviations. Conversations occur over multiple days. All of these factors make it difficult to pinpoint bad behaviors. As a result, compliance teams face a lot of pressure when trying to pinpoint risk and bad behavior. Adding to this pressure is review fatigue due to the high number of false positives. Now, we'll talk in later slides how Trace can reduce false positives. And because of the high volume of data, there's the need for larger compliance teams. All of these factors lead to delayed review and even uneducated review, where the compliance officer doesn't have the full context of a communication. Let's turn things over to Anna Green to talk more about what financial institutions are doing now to solve these challenges. Take it away, Anna.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm Anna Green, a senior analyst at Opimus, a research and consulting firm focused on tech and capital markets. I focus on regulatory and compliance priorities for financial institutions and their service providers. Today, I'm delighted to share some of the findings from a report we recently wrote called Benchmarking Communication Surveillance Programs, which we came up with by interviewing over 150 financial institutions, and which scores how financial institutions are doing in terms of their communication surveillance programs, where they're doing particularly well and where they've fallen short. Let's start by looking at some of the regulatory pressure on financial institutions. Firms must be able to show both the reactive and proactive steps they're taking to monitoring their communications. In addition to providing protection from bad actors within their own firms and protecting their services, the fines for financial offenses are really hefty. While global fines peaked about 5 years ago, in the United States alone, fines have averaged about $16 billion per year over the last 20 years. And wording along the lines of failure to monitor communication sufficiently can be found in many of the misconduct rulings. For example, in 2017, Barclays Capital was fined over $15 million when traders on its retail and mortgage-backed securities desk made misleading and false statements to customers. Part of the ruling was that Barclays had the means to monitor communications for false and misleading statements, but failed to do so. These fines are important in the context of our discussion about communication surveillance because retention requirements, like those described in MiFID II, Dodd-Frank, and the Market Abuse Directive, are everywhere and don't appear to be diminishing. Now, let's dive into the core research findings. On the left side of this table, you'll find the 13 key features of quality communications monitoring programs. In the columns to the right, we have scored to what degree the different categories of market participants currently have these elements in place. Right off the bat, you see that the buy side, the 3 columns on the right, underperforms the sell side considerably in terms of sophistication of their programs. And perhaps unsurprisingly, we also find that larger institutions tend to outperform smaller ones. While most institutions feel pretty good about points 1 and 2, recording and archiving, the scores start to drop once you continue down the list. So additional elements of the best programs include number 3, surveillance across all relevant communication channels and types, and 4, monitoring for damaging behavior. And the scores start to drop further at number 5, having sufficient yet targeted alerts, which is worth focusing on for a minute. Finding the balance between quality surveillance and achieving a manageable number of alerts is actually hard. And to improve this, firms can consider whether their lexicon searches can identify keywords, phrase variations, and logic groups, whether techniques that derive metadata from unstructured data, including sentiment analysis, entity recognition, and language identification can be used, or simply if noise can be eliminated, including from duplicative email segments, email signatures, confidentiality disclaimers, and more. Really, a lot can be done to improve the quality of alerts produced. Number 6, ACOMS, or voice analytics, also receives particularly low scores, with only 20% of even the largest investment banks saying that they do quite well. The most impressive communication surveillance programs do, however, automate the monitoring of voice communications to some extent. And they even sometimes employ tools like audio playback with follow-along text, trainable transcriptions, speaker identification, and whitespace trimming. Other important components of surveillance programs include focusing on the optimization of workflows. Number 8, investing in case management, investigation management. Number 9, ensuring that the user experience is streamlined and efficient. And number 10, that communications across all languages used are carefully managed. And the lack of multilingual communications monitoring really stood out to us as a gap here, with very few, even very big international firms monitoring more than one language, typically English. And the importance of fixing this should not be understated. An excellent program should prioritize providing surveillance policies in all relevant languages, having translation tools on hand, using auto language detection capabilities, audio transcription tools, and ideally having multi-language search. And market participants of all types really received low scores for the remaining elements, including number 11, integration capabilities, where most firms report operating in an extremely siloed manner, often analyzing every communication type separately even. Number 12, technical flexibility and configurability is another category with room for improvement, especially to stay flexible as new regulations and communication channels are inevitably introduced. And finally, very few firms have very sophisticated, dedicated support structures for their communication surveillance programs. Let's illustrate this by looking at a specific example of a medium-sized asset manager that's a client of ours. This firm described many of the same struggles shared in the previous discussion. So moving forward, they plan to invest in a much more robust case management system, which centralizes the analysis of several surveillance streams. And the firm is planning an overhaul of its audio surveillance, which currently relies entirely on human spot checking still. They say they don't monitor anything proactively there that's not in English. And they acknowledge that their siloed systems and processes complicate and slow their investigations substantially. Now, looking at AI, this is rapidly changing, but for a long time, financial institutions hesitated adopting AI techniques for two main reasons, although there are several. Number 1, a good excuse seemed to be that compliance procedures need to be easily defensible to the regulator, and relying on something newfangled scared a lot of people off, the idea of the black box. And number 2, keeping up with even the most basic level of regulatory requirements was more than many market participants could afford. It's more than they could chew at the time. This appears to be changing now, with firms looking to do more than simply be compliant. For communication surveillance, market participants tend to employ at a minimum an archiving platform with basic search capabilities and lexicon, like a global relay or SMARSH. But many also rely on more tailored and complete surveillance solutions, like what is provided by our host Relativity, which with Trace provides an unusually comprehensive solution across the criteria discussed today, either natively or through partnership and integrations. Now, to end this talk, let me just briefly emphasize that even in these unusual times, lack of coverage is not an excuse that will be accepted for letting bad behavior go unnoticed. And as discussed today, in terms of really having a sound approach to communication surveillance in place, a lot of firms are short of the mark. For a much more detailed discussion of these 13 elements and to benchmark your own firm, I strongly encourage you to reach out to Relativity for a copy of the report. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Anna, for sharing your research on where financial institutions are in delivering comprehensive communication surveillance today, the barriers that have held them back from using AI to advance their practices, and the success those leveraging the latest techniques have experienced. One thing that you mentioned that really resonated is this black box approach to AI. You've also heard this from financial institutions, them talking about the lack of transparency in these mega models that attempt to detect every type of risk under the sun. We've also heard them mention the lack of accuracy in this approach and the extreme amount of time they take to train these models, potentially years. Here at Relativity Trace, we take a different approach to AI. We build purpose-driven AI capabilities that tackle targeted challenges, and we combine each of these machine learning and natural language processing capabilities together to deliver acute risk detection while heavily reducing false positive alerts that bog down compliance teams. You can think about the combination of these capabilities as different steps within a funnel. Each step acts on your emails, your chats, your voice communications, and collaboration data to find the content that actually matters to a compliance team while constantly learning and improving from past decisions that have been made. Our customers who have enacted this approach have witnessed up to a 92% reduction in false positive alerts. 92%. Think of the time savings, how much that frees up compliance officers to focus on more meaningful tasks. These are things like performing deep investigations, maybe educating members of the organization on regulatory requirements and their obligations, or just ensuring that internal processes are up to date and meeting changing regulations from global regulators. Continuing with the theme of transparency, we want to show you some of the AI capabilities that are used and expanding in Relativity Trace. These capabilities fall into 3 key strategic categories. First, we identify and clear irrelevant content, both from full messages and sections of a part of a message, so we can focus on what truly matters. Once we've located the true content of a communication, we pinpoint risk and misconduct through a holistic understanding of the scenario. And finally, we focus on providing clarity and context to compliance officers so that they have the information necessary to make an informed decision on what actions need to be taken and are able to explain what transpired to key stakeholders and regulators. Now, Eileen, why don't you come back in and tell us a little bit more about the Relativity Trace capabilities to remove this irrelevant content?
All right, let's take a look at irrelevant content. Now, the type of irrelevant content that you would want to eliminate from review, and there are relativity features you can use to remove that content. One obvious example of irrelevant content is spam that floods our inboxes on a weekly, if not daily basis. So think of items such as advertisements, promotional offers, and similar types of junk email. Most organizations have mechanisms to prevent spam from reaching their employees' inboxes. But of course, there will be cases where the spam makes it past such filtering mechanisms. And that's where Relativity's machine learning comes into play. Now remember, Trace is an application that is built on top of Relativity. Thus, we can leverage all of Relativity's features and products, including machine learning, to zero in on the content that is important for compliance officers. Using machine learning, you can build a machine learning model that detects spam and removes spam from your reviewers' alert queues. Industry newsletters is another category of relevant content that we want to suppress from review. These are email blasts containing, for example, how-to articles on boosting company sales and revenue. You also want to filter out research reports documenting latest trends and growth forecasts in various industries. Again, using machine learning, you can build models to detect spam, industry newsletters, research reports, and any other types of content you wish to filter from review. However, keep in mind that there may be cases where such non-risky content can become risky communications. For example, an employee might forward a research report about a company to another employee and disclose details of a deal regarding that company. With Trace, you can incorporate functionality that identifies these types of risky communications. Previously, we looked at communications where the entirety of the communication can be discarded as irrelevant content. Now let's examine instances where the irrelevant content is included within the body of a communication. Here, we only want to remove certain parts of a communication such that the communication doesn't cause a false positive alert. We're very excited to introduce a new trace feature called AI data cleansing that automatically identifies irrelevant content and removes such content from the extracted text of communications. Let's take a look at the types of irrelevant data that Trace's AI data cleansing can identify and remove. At the bottom of the screen here, we see something all too common in communications: confidentiality disclaimers. Oftentimes, keywords are present in confidentiality disclaimers, which result in the generation of false positives. Trace's data cleansing feature uses AI to automatically identify confidentiality disclaimers as communications are ingested in Trace, then removes the disclaimers from the extracted text so that they are not indexed and thus never alerted on. Trace can also recognize and remove signature blocks in emails to prevent them from being alerted on. Note that the AI data cleansing feature scans the entirety of a communication for relevant data, and not just the top and bottom portions of each communication. Thus, for example, any signature blocks that appear throughout an entire email are automatically removed. Email headers, another type of relevant content, are also automatically identified and removed by Trace from the extracted text, but we do leave the subject line intact. All these operations lead to a significant decrease in the number of false positives caused by irrelevant content within the body of a communication. The final AI data cleansing operation I'd like to showcase is email threading. Now, for those in the audience who are familiar with deduplication in email threading for structured analytics, I'd like to point out what I'm talking about here is a completely separate feature. In the email you see before you, Sarah has emailed Akhil about a particular opportunity. Sarah's original email, the root email in the thread, has already been collected from her inbox and ingested into the workspace by Trace. Akhil then sends a response to Sarah, and Sarah's original email is included in the body of Akhil's response. As Akhil's email is being ingested into Trace, email threading deduplication is able to recognize that the portion of the email containing Sarah's text has already been ingested by Trace and removes it from the extracted text of Akhil's email. Thus, if Sarah's original email had been alerted on due to the presence of any keywords, Akhil's reply would not generate another alert unless Akhil himself uses keywords in the Trace terms list. Email threading deduplication is key to reducing alerts from content that is relevant but represent duplicates. Now, a quick reminder here that text is only removed from the extracted text and not the native version of the email. Thus, the entire email chain is available to the reviewer and no context is lost. Trace's AI data cleansing feature leaves the reviewer with only the relevant data to read through. The result is a significant savings in reviewer time and effort. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back to Peter to talk about pinpointing risk and misconduct.
Now that we've located the relevant content within a communication, the content that was actually meant to be shared by the author of the message, we can focus on pinpointing risk and misconduct. But to identify risk and misconduct, we need to have a deeper understanding than just the words in the message. This is why basic lexicon approaches are ultimately unsuccessful. We must use AI techniques to create this deeper understanding, to drive us toward making a more informed decision around a communication. We're focusing on understanding three key aspects of a communication. We need to understand the people involved in the conversation. We need to understand the direct communication itself. And we need to understand the greater context of what is occurring around a communication that ultimately drives the intent and meaning of the communication itself. To understand the people, we organize the disparate data related to each individual participating in a communication. We align on basics like the organization they work for and their title, but also derive information from every communication that has been analyzed, such as how risky is this individual? And based on historic alerting patterns, what types of risks are they susceptible to? Now, although an individual's place within an organization's hierarchy does impact many aspects of how they communicate and the types of misconduct they may perform, we strive for a deeper understanding. This is why we're expanding to understand the personal relationships between individuals based on communication patterns and linguistics used in their conversations. And this is extremely important because nuanced risks, let's say collusion, are more likely to occur between individuals that trust one another or are friendly with one another. This is why understanding the people is so important to detecting risk. We then shift to understand the communications itself. And of course, lexicons are something we look for, but we rely on purpose-driven AI capabilities to drive a deeper understanding. These models will detect things like the languages used or switched between within a conversation. They'll identify events mentioned within a communication or trade details that are discussed. And they'll ultimately classify paragraphs and sentences based on key behaviors that are actually used as indicators to different types of risk and misconduct. We also look past the single communication to the events that provide a greater context. We're looking to how this communication fits in the greater conversation that may span days or weeks and meander across email, chat, or voice conversations. We also look to non-communication events. These are things like trades that are happening or transactions or reports that are being generated that are ultimately related to the communication and that can tell a story of the events that unfolded or the pressure that was ultimately felt by an individual that resulted in some sort of action. We will analyze the historic patterns of communications as well to compare what has unfolded today to the past, to spot trends, irregularities, anomalies that could be a tip to the system to a certain type of behavior. At this point, we know many attributes of a single communication. We understand the people, the communication itself, and the context of the message, all using AI techniques. Now, some of these attributes are directly correlated to a specific type of risk, but risk detection models can't rely on a single data point. Risk detection models use the holistic set of attributes as inputs to make a confident decision on a single communication. Individual risk detection models built specifically for types of, let's say, market abuse or collusion or fraud and other types of misconduct ultimately correlate the meaning from many derived data points to make a decision. And this ultimately empowers compliance teams to protect their businesses from those bad actors with less effort. Now, ignoring irrelevant noise and locating true risk is essential to any communication surveillance solution. But a system like this must still be built with an end compliance officer in mind, a person who is actually interacting with the system and attempting to create their own learnings and actually take actions. And this is why our AI is built with a focus on transparency and explainability, with the goal to increase reviewer understanding of the events so they have clarity when having to confront an individual or report to a stakeholder or respond to a regulator. So Eileen, why don't you come tell us a little bit more about the capabilities that Relativity Trace delivers here in this space?
As we've discussed, Trace is built on top of Relativity, so compliance officers can leverage all of Trace's and Relativity's features to increase reviewers' understanding of the alerts that are generated. Let's take a look back at Trace's AI data cleansing feature, which removes irrelevant content and duplicate content from newly ingested emails. Although text is removed only from the extracted text, Trace highlights or blocks out in gray the affected text in the native version of the communication. Compliance officers can then hover over portions of the flagged text to see why the text was excluded from being indexed. As a result, compliance officers have clarity into what text was removed, as well as the reasons why. Moving on, one of the core Relativity features compliance officers can use to gain insight into alerts is email threading. Email threading displays the sequence of an entire email conversation, including replies, forwards, and allows reviewers to jump to coding decisions that have been made on segments of the conversation. As reviewers read through their assigned alerts, if they come across a communication that they want to dig deeper into, they can use the concept search feature to quickly retrieve conceptually similar communications. In addition, compliance officers can easily group alerts together into topics using clustering to target topic areas that contain a high number of alerts. If a compliance officer comes across an employee that she or he needs to investigate further, communications analysis provides a diagram of the internal and external entities that that employee has communicated with and allows the compliance officer to pull up distinct conversations. Finally, compliance officers can use the reporting capabilities in Trace to produce charts and tables that report on the volume of alerts, terms with the highest number of hits, and any other information that is relevant. Now, these dashboards you see before you are customizable by the Trace front-end user and can be exported in spreadsheet format. Peter, I'll hand things off to you now to bring us home.
You know, Eileen, something you mentioned at the beginning, protecting an organization is hard. I often think that compliance teams are really the superheroes within an organization. They are the protectors that locate the villains and act before the evil plan can unfold and impact the world. But superheroes can't do the job completely on their own. I mean, for instance, Batman has his utility belt, Spider-Man his webs, and Wonder Woman has superhuman strength and agility. Luckily, compliance teams have innovative artificial intelligence capabilities streamlined into Relativity Trace to aid them in their quest to determine right from wrong. AI is deeply ingrained into how Relativity Trace operates and is where we are investing in the future. But Relativity Trace is a holistic communication surveillance offering. It delivers AI to detect risk, but also enables you to monitor all communications across email, chat, voice, collaboration, and mobile channels. It has highly configurable workflows that mold to your organization, eliminating any gaps in coverage while allowing your compliance teams to remain streamlined and efficient. It offers broader compliance solutions like trade reconstruction and case management to help you enact controls and meet regulatory obligations. And it's all built on a global secure cloud platform, so you can adapt quickly as your business shifts or regulatory requirements change. Relativity Trace is built to help compliance teams protect the world from professional misconduct.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Relativity Trace, reach out to us at trace@relativity.com. We hope to hear from you. Please join us at some of our other Relativity Trace sessions within our dedicated compliance track, and take our survey to let us know how we did.